This may be just reiterating what George said, but sometimes I think even in group and in church contexts, that there's the virtue of niceness is overrides the virtue of courage and speaking.
Or what is taken to be a
truth.
virtue of niceness.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
We just had that in a discussion.
Jen and I are
a
from
chat
California, where people are
discussion.
not quite as polite and courteous as they are here in the Midwest. And we're reminded of this. Sometimes we go back to California. In fact, she grew up near Berkeley, California, and worked in her dad's bookshop in Berkeley. Not a polite place. But nevertheless, some people have talked about Michigan nice or Minnesota nice. Anybody want to respond to Janet's idea that sometimes niceness gets in the way of the courage? Is that? Yeah, that wins out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Amy?
I think that Jesus wasn't particularly nice.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think we would say, oh, what a nice guy. He was all these virtues, but not necessarily nice. I think we are nice to avoid conflict.
Well, yes. And it comes up in another way. I think as George may have been kind of suggesting, it's still there, but we haven't addressed it. And of course, decorum, the issue of how to bring it up. We talked about that last week, the week before, is part of this, but I haven't included a decorum in the virtues. It's more of a framing concern. Anyone else want to comment on, did we read honesty to speak the truth in love? Oh, we haven't read that yet. Okay.
There's a Zoom question. Could listen, welcome, understand, challenge, and speak the truth be considered virtues?
What were the terms again?
The 5 points that you have: listen, welcome, understand, challenge, and speak the truth.
Oh, the other, I think the other terms are there, the adjectives to kind of provide a gloss. So they are part of the package. I'm shortening it to, again, what could be memorable, but yes.
But the question was, can we call those virtues?
Call those virtues. I think, I guess off the top of my head, I'd say in combination with some actual character quality. So what were give me one of them.
So for example, challenge.
Yeah, challenge by itself is not the willingness to challenge, which then I think becomes courage, won't identify a moral quality. And that's what we're looking for. Now, back to the writing of this, I would avoid, and you're going to see how I avoid it, phrases at the heading of these virtues, because for that very reason, you have to have the whole phrase to get the concept. And as I said with the doctor, I said I would call it compassion, attentiveness, so not the willingness to be attentive. So it's one of my concerns about how these are worded, is that comes up. Where does that fit? If that's okay, do you have another question back there? Okay, now, Amy, you've got the microphone. Did you read the honesty?
Honesty to speak the truth in love. Honesty is a determined commitment to discovering and speaking the truth. Fidelity to what is the case and an unwillingness to mislead are hallmarks of honesty. Honesty fosters an open environment that encourages growth and leads to real progress.
Leads to real progress. I don't know where that other 5 came from, but anyway, honesty. Well, again, for Aristotle, it's going to be one of the what he called cardinal virtues, right up there at the top. If you don't have honesty, you're not going to be making any progress whatsoever. Ordering is an issue here. I don't know how this happened to end up as kind of the last one. I don't think it means least significant, at least it didn't for me. Anyone want to comment on this? Discovering and speaking the truth, fidelity to what is the case. And this is, you'll recognize from the conspiracy theory conversation, an unwillingness to mislead, right? Hallmarks of honesty. This is one where we actually fleshed out the concept a little bit in the commentary. Anybody want to comment on honesty? Yeah, Amy?
I think that people have a hard time being honest with themselves.
Mhm.
They have a hard time getting to the heart of why they think the way they do, or why they believe the way they do. And so that they project dishonesty in their discourse because they haven't really thought through what they believe.
Okay, now I'm going to back up to kind of the beginning of the talk. The idea is the development of moral character. Again, it sort of sounds like old-fashioned talk, it shouldn't. But in the character is developed by habituation, that is making similar to good choices again and again until it becomes second nature, as we call second nature. So Aristotle would suggest practicing these by, in a situation that requires honesty, be honest, do it again and again. So I think there is some of the answer to that question or observation is, how does this happen? Well, not unless we put some effort into it and have a kind of a vision of what is honest to begin with. Fidelity to the truth, unwillingness to mislead. Now you can see that if you're actually going to do this, it takes some work. You know, it's not, we can't just hand out the brochure. And we did hand out a lot of brochures. In fact, my kids were teasing me about this just over the internet today, that the library had bookmarks with these. And it was kind of funny. But so who was the guy? David, what was his last name? Was the librarian at the time. Anyway, the librarian liked these and put them on colorful bookmarks and handed them out to every student that came into the library. Okay, now let's switch. We got a little bit of time left. There's my book, Argumentation, and I wrote that book originally about 30 years ago. It's 1992, 30 years ago. Yes. What's that? Okay. And in Argumentation, Understanding and Shaping Arguments, and that's about the 4th or 5th edition of it there, I actually added a component on ethics because some of the people using the book wanted it addressed. And I thought, well, where can I go? Now, this predates what I just showed you. So this is actually the deeper background. I wanted to write a section for the book on the ethics of public discourse for my argumentation students. And argumentation was not taught as debate, but it was taught in my history at Hope College for 36 years. They taught at least a section of this every semester, and sometimes 2 sections every semester. So I had a lot of students go through the critical thinking course. And so I went to the virtues idea of Alistair McIntyre, and I thought, well, how could I apply that to the public discourse situation? And out of that foundation came the ones you just looked at, the 5, and I said other people contributed as well. You can see how much briefer mine is. The first one, and the ordering, this is kind of my own ordering, but you could say maybe it should go a different order. Honesty, an unwillingness to mislead an audience engaged in the process of decision making. Well, we saw that last week, I think, already when we were having our conversation about what was the top audiences. Now that one, I would hope you could say, after having used it a few times, I'm not going to mislead an audience when they're making a decision. That, you see, there's a little different feel than the longer descriptions we had up there before. How does that strike you as a virtue? We could say, in that person is unwilling to mislead an audience. Any reaction to that, Mark?
You know, I look at this and I think this is virtuous, but you know, many of these things were penned 20, 25, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The milieu, the environment we're in today is so different. You know, and
because they didn't listen.
Amen. Okay. You know, Brene Brown says that there used to be fundamentally 30 different emotions that we could exercise at any given time. And now it's been narrowed down to 3. We're either happy, we're sad, or pardon my French, we're pissed off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's transpired, and I think about what's going on with the media, and, you know, we're subject to the particular biased media that we like. And so to what degree are we willing to have the kind of dialogue and discourse and the patience to do that?
Right.
And you know, how do we rectify this?
Well, the flip side of all of this, of course, is you can have exactly the opposite effect by doing exactly the opposite of what's being suggested here. And I won't say any more about that, but look, in being an educator, you got to be kind of idealistic. You know, you say, I don't know if, but I'm hoping this comes back to somebody somewhere down the road. But as a culture, we seem to have kind of navigated a different channel. Anyone else want to comment? Yes, Barbara.
I'm an old storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that comes to mind with me is the emperor has no clothes. If we only listen to the 4-year-olds, we could learn an awful lot. And so it seems to me that with honesty, it's one of those things that once you're an adult, maybe you have to go back and relearn, which is harder
Mm-hmm.
than when you're 4. So maybe the real perhaps the best way to inculcate this is not to lose it in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good, helpful point. And also, I think a lot of us have been struck with the fact that kids seem to embody and kind of naturally some of these virtues. What kind of commentary is that? Okay. Well, also making the point, putting these 2 points together, when we go into the public domain, into the media, into organizational conversations, rallies, we're learning something. Somebody's teaching somebody something. And we want it to be something we want them to learn, you know, that they should learn. And so again, some of Aristotle's language and even McIntyre's, their mind seemed a little strained, a little old-fashioned, but we got to somehow change direction and head down the path a little different way. Let's see what I got. That's number. Oh, I didn't number these. Okay. Courage. Well, there's courage again. Now you can see this looks like it came right out of the core of the one earlier that said courage, and it probably did. Actually, this is the core, and I put it into the other one. A willingness to accept the risk associated with advocating a morally sound, though unpopular idea. Now, this is, I have to say, make this point. This is not the usual definition of courage. It's not intended to be. It's the definition of courage as a virtue of public discourse. This is what I try to get my students to think about. In the discursive situation, what is courage? Now, I know courage means willingness to face fears, but in the public discourse situation, it has a little more nuanced meaning. Are you willing to accept the risk of advocating an unpopular idea that you believe is morally sound? Okay, does anybody want to react to that? I think the content is relatively easy to grasp. We've talked a little bit about, I think George brought it up, that, you know, people have a hard time with bringing up a new idea that they know is going to invite some conflict or something along those lines. And I'm going to say, I tell my students when I gloss it in class, I keep talking as if I'm still teaching. It's so nostalgic. That democracy needs a store of new ideas, right? If we're just going back to the same ideas all the time. And how do we test ideas? I mean, we've had some very bad ideas in place in this country at times. And how do we test the ideas and arrive at a better idea unless somebody has some courage? So we have a comment?
Jean was
Jean?
smiling, so I thought she might have something to say.
Go ahead, Jean.
I think this is the virtue I have the hardest time with because I think there are real risks.
Well, I'm glad you said that. Thank you. It wouldn't require courage if there weren't some actual risks. Yeah. George.
I think you put this together with the first point, honesty. And we have far too many people in the public sphere that will tell us what they think we want to hear, what they think we want to hear.
Yeah.
And don't tell us what we need to hear.
Yes. And again, I won't gloss that or comment on that, but this is all about not just how we live our lives in the spheres we're in, but about the public sphere as well. Anyone else want to comment any more on, let's see what's next here. Okay, now, this is where I diverge a little bit from the one I showed you originally. Cooperation. Now, the reason cooperation is here as a virtue of public discourse is because I see public discourse as necessarily bidirectional or multidirectional. That means I got to be willing to cooperate. I can't say I know better than anybody else in the conversation, anybody else in the room. Well, I don't have to participate. Well, that's not a virtuous position in my book. literally, figuratively, a commitment to engage in the multi-directional process of public discourse. Will you submit to it or won't you? Now, I use a term like submit. Sounds like I'm giving up some of my freedom. But without cooperation, we don't have public discourse. We have speeches maybe that people are making or editorials. Anyone want to respond to this comment? We've only got about 2 left, and we're rounding the last couple of curves in the path. Anyone want to comment on cooperation? Are you committed to engaging in a multi-directional process? It means a willingness to say, I will participate. You're nodding knowingly, George. I don't know if you want to comment on it, but
No, I think that's true.
yeah. Unless people are cooperative, you won't get the. This is partly also, see, what I rejected in writing my argumentation book was the prevailing model, which had been prevailing model for 150 years, debate. Now, I got nothing against debate and debaters, but it wasn't satisfying my need for a textbook where the multi-directional interaction, cooperative interaction, not a competition, but a cooperative effort to arrive at a reasonable, virtuous conclusion. And again, kind of idealistic, but this is intended to bring in the multi-directionality of the discursive setting. Okay, and we're so used to somebody, including myself as a professor, up front, kind of talking, and how can we slowly make that a more cooperative process, right? And would we be better off if we could? Okay, let's see, we're almost there, folks. Now, respect for persons. A willingness to acknowledge the reasoning capacity of the other. Now, this is very terse, and I put it this way because I wanted to say, if you can't acknowledge anything else in that other person, they're at least people who can reason, are they not? If you take that away from them, there's not much of the human being left. But respect for persons, this is not a high bar. This is kind of in the middle or a little lower. A willingness to acknowledge that at least the person you're talking to has reasoning capacity. I mean, acknowledge it, take it seriously. Anybody want to comment on that?
Oh, definitely.
Amy, yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot more parroting than we are reasoning.
Are you saying parroting?
Parrot, like,
Yeah, the bird. Yeah.
yeah. Like I heard this from whoever, and so I'm just going to repeat it.
Okay. And you see that as a violation of a commitment to reasoning.
Right, because you can't even, like, you can't have discourse with someone who only will parrot what someone else has said.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, yes. Reasoning is an activity, it's not a passive response, yes. Anyone else want to comment on respect for persons? Now, there's lots of other qualities that we should put up here that would show respect for persons and compassion and all sorts of things. But I'm saying if this is all you can come up with, can you at least commit yourself to the reasoning capacity of others as something you're willing to acknowledge? Okay, we're going to wrap it up and then maybe we'll have a little extra time to converse if we need that. And now this is the surprise entry in the contest here. Regard for context. Okay. Now this will not sound familiar. This is partly the answer to a question that was asked earlier. I think Amy maybe asked, and so I'll get to that at the very end. I don't even remember what it was now.
It might come back.
Yeah, okay. A commitment to create and maintain physical spaces and human relationships in which public discourse may occur. Hold it. What does that mean? What does it mean to you? It's not intuitively obvious. I don't think it is. What do you think it means? Look at it. It says create and maintain physical spaces and human relationships in which discourse can occur. Anybody want to comment? Yeah, Jen?
Well, it comes back to, I think what you were talking about was when Amy said that sometimes there are disagreements here
Yes.
at HASP even. This makes me think of the term used earlier, that safe space. And
Yes.
safe space implies that there's enough of a relationship between people that they can disagree. So within the context that you, even though you may even get emotionally upset about the differences of opinions, still there is a relationship there that maintains.
And you're using
discourse.
safe space kind of metaphorically, right? And I think usually when we use it, is you mean it kind of metaphorically, a safe space means I can talk.
Yeah, well, you will not be,
Yeah.
that you will not be humiliated.
And I meant
Yeah.
literally, these four walls are a space, create a space in which people can express themselves. Now, I feel kind of strongly about that, or did at the time when I at one time when I was writing this, I was being asked to give talks various places, churches, academic organizations, or be on a panel. And I couldn't believe how many times I showed up. The lighting was terrible. The podium was covered with a spaghetti bowl of wires. There was no water for me. People were sitting 4 rows back. I felt distant from them. And it happened over and over and over. And I thought, wait a minute. Why are the hosts being so inhospitable to a guest speaker they're paying to bring in from a long ways away? They're paying him an honorarium. They're going to sit there and listen to him for an hour. And he can't even put his computer down on so he can read his notes. Now, that was one thing I thought. But I thought also, wait a minute. What about relationships? We've all experienced a slam the door in your face phenomenon where somebody disagrees with you. And instead of hanging in there and developing that space, that relational space, they destroy it. They start shouting, they storm out. The students can relate to that very well too. They've all experienced that as well. So so I'm saying there are two kinds of contexts here. One's an actual physical context. Now, let me tell you a little story very quickly because I don't want to disregard your rights as a listener. Where is the Martha Miller Center from here? I spent 30 years in there. Okay. The Martha Miller Center. I was on the team that came up with the plans for that building, at least the original team. I didn't come up with the plans because basically you're listening to the architects tell you what's going to be in the building, what has to be in the building. But in some of the blueprints for the original building before it was ever built, there was a space that had not been designated yet, and they didn't know what to do with it. They're going to turn it into classrooms, going to use it for performances, and I said, what if we just created a space in which about 80 people could listen to a talk, in which there was good lighting and good acoustics, and where you were not going to put a grand piano up there. That's the first thing people want to put in, see a platform or a stage. They want a piano there. And so I said, you're going to have a music building here. You don't need a performance space. Could we just preserve that? And they said, yeah, sure. Why not? Great. I want to be feeling vindicated because I created a space where ideas can be heard. Came back next time, they'd cut it in half and made 2 classrooms out of it. And I said, to use Mark's phrase, I was PO'd. And I said, no, look, guys, I had a reason for wanting that space. Just, you know, the auditorium I'm talking about on the first floor. You've been in there? If not, stop in there sometime. There's a very nice, small auditorium. And am I taking credit for that being there? Yes, I am. So I said, look, guys, I really would like to see that space turned back into a public speaking venue that's friendly and accommodating and well-designed and good acoustics. And they did. Then the next thing I wanted to do was make it 200 people. I said, no, 200 is too big. We need a space. So anyway, regard for context, create and maintain physical spaces. I really mean that. And I think in the design of public buildings, that has to be taken into consideration, probably is. In some spaces like a church, it's automatic, it's kind of there, you know, the sanctuary. But in a lot of places, it's just not there. Where can the public business of discourse take place? Okay, so that's my gloss on that one. I believe that's actually my last slide. Yes, it is. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. You've been very attentive, and I appreciate your hanging in there for the whole, you know, you had 5 virtues and 5 more virtues. Anybody want to respond to the regard for context? Does this speak to you? Yeah, George.
Just a little while ago, the HASP nonfiction book group read a book on cities.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that the author carried through his history of his cities was to talk about one of the virtues being that there were places for people to gather
Yes.
within the cities. And that's where exchanges of ideas and innovation came. And
Yes.
he had that stretch through 4,000 years of history.
Yes. Well, good. I'd love to hear that or watch it. It was a presentation,
It was a book we read.
a book. Okay.
It's called Metropolis.
Yeah, I really applaud that. And I think it's been one of the keys to great cities that they make spaces for the public to be present and also to express themselves. The Athenians had a word for the right of anyone who wanted to get up and give a talk to get up and give a talk, and it was isagoria. I don't know what the root of that word is. Basically it meant, and if you want to talk about something, you can come to the arena and talk about it. Now that I have to qualify this, if you were a free male citizen, right? So it wasn't a bribe. Wait, we're not going crazy here. But nevertheless, at least the idea had occurred to them. They had to create a space and give everybody an opportunity. Anyone else want to comment on the idea of spaces, relational or physical context?
It was interesting to hear you talk about the lighting was bad. There's no place for me to put my stuff. I don't think a lot of people who engage people to come in even think about those things.
Well, that's my point. Yeah.
But entertainers
Oh, yeah.
send their list ahead of time. These are all of my demands before
Interesting.
I get there.
That's a good, yeah, these are academic settings and academic people are really bad about this, but you're right. Entertainers probably, the stage is where they live their
This
lives.
is how we're going to do it. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment? Barbara.
Well, it seems to me that the British parliamentary system managed to come up with Hyde Park.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Hyde Park is a place for, if anybody doesn't know it, Hyde Park is a place where anybody can get up in his soapbox at any point, at any time of the day, and say whatever it is you want to say. It can be religious, it can be political, it can be, I don't know, I don't like where the city lights are. Whatever it is that is hitting you at the moment, you can say, and nobody's going to pull you off your soapbox. In some ways, that was the original intention of Facebook. But we also, the scope is so huge, and the anonymity of all of that has created a situation that our society has not necessarily been able yet to come to complete grips with, because you can say anything and nobody knows who you are, which is very different than standing up on the soapbox physically and saying what it is you have to say.
Yeah, Union Square in San Francisco has a similar kind of tradition. But we are inheritors, I'm going to assume, of a Greco-Roman British-American tradition. And where public speaking has been honored. Now, in other parts of the world, it's never been a practice and never been honored. And it should be protected and cultivated, and Hyde Park is one way that's done. It's spaces in cities where, I've seen this in other cities, where a person who just wants to express their point of view is given a venue anyway. Anyone else want to comment on physical spaces or relationships?
So not exactly a physical space, but there's a comment from Zoom on the book Metropolis.
Yeah.
That is written by Ben Wilson.
Okay. Ben Wilson, Metropolis, and you recommend it? I do. George, thank you. Okay. Mark.
There's a woman at Harvard, I can't recall her name, right? It's Ellen something. Thank you. And she has this great line: human behavior is context dependent. And you can say that, with where you live in your home or the city that you live in or the classroom that you teach.
Yeah.
That human behavior is in fact influenced by the context. And so like even yesterday, I went to a luncheon at the Civic Center, and it was a great luncheon with one exception. And they had a panel on the stage. They were virtually in the dark. I don't know who forgot to turn the lights on the panel. And it created a disconnect. It was unfortunate,
Yeah.
And so there wasn't the kind of human enthusiasm that you might want on an occasion like that
Yeah.
because the context was diminished.
Well, yes, thank you, Mark. And that's the kind of thing I saw over and over. And even Amy's willingness to run around with the microphone is creating a space where we can interact, you know. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why this is not attended to. I gave a talk at Wake Forest University one time. I was introducing a very famous scientist. And I walked up to the podium with my computer. There was no place to put it. It was covered with wires, microphones. I can't stand here and read, so I had to kind of ad lib, but I didn't say, hey, but it was one of those experiences where I thought, look, nobody gave any thought to this at all. The space in which you don't bring this guy in and not introduce him properly, you know, so I don't mean me, I mean the scientist. Anyone else? Final comments? We're wrapping up. Yeah, Beverly.
Yeah, this was really more apropos a little bit earlier when you were covering the hope things, but you had courage, truth, telling the truth to love. And a term that I hear a lot in recent years is speaking truth to power versus speaking truth to love. Which is
a courage issue. Yeah.
A courage issue, but has a different context, I think.
Yes, it does. It's different. And as one is biblical and the other one is not. But speaking the truth in love is biblical. Speaking truth to courage. I don't know who originated that phrase, but I don't think it's biblical. Is it, George?
It seems like a lot of this boils down to the golden rule.
Yeah.
Which is in a lot of different cultures. It's not just in Christianity. It's in other religions and other cultures too.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So if you are familiar with C.S. Lewis, the author, and you want to read something very pithy and interesting, his book, The Abolition of Man, is 3 lectures he gave in the 40s. And at the end, the appendix is what he calls the universal values, and he labels them the Tao, T-A-O. And he's basically trying to flesh that out. That this is, I'm not saying that only Christianity has had access to these values. In fact, I want to argue the opposite. Look, The Abolition of Man, if you haven't read it, get it, read it. It's only 60 pages long, but the appendix is worth the cost of the book. It's not too medical, but anyone else have a comment before we wrap up here? Yeah, Dave.
There's one from Zoom. In this month's The Atlantic, there is a piece comparing the dissolution of Facebook and similar social media to the Tower of Babel. I do not personally agree with the analogy, but it's interesting to see how it went off the rails.
Yeah, and this is a huge topic. We've kind of approached it a few times. Social media, how does all this fit in the context of social media? We talked about the anonymity of commentary and all that kind of thing, and the lack of accountability. I do kind of have in mind something a little more face-to-face, a little more intimate, a little more human-based, but I'm not personally on any social media outlets. And there's a reason for that. But anybody who's going to address these questions seriously from here on in is going to have to talk about those platforms and how they developed. And of course, Elon Musk just bought Twitter. I read a cartoon in the New Yorker yesterday. Mr. Musk has now announced that since he's bought Twitter, he's now going to buy everything else. Okay, well, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you've benefited in some ways. And I've just say thanks for the participation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I am still getting email at herrick@hope.edu. So if you want to ask me a question, feel free to use that address, herrick@hope.edu, and I'll respond as quickly as I can. And have a wonderful day.